The moment that little boy hit the water, time stopped for everyone standing on that shoreline except for one. And it wasn't a person, it was a dog, a 4-year-old golden retriever named Max, who was already moving before the first scream finished echoing across the frozen lake. And what happened next would be talked about in that small Minnesota town for years, shared millions of times online, and remind every single person who saw it that sometimes the bravest hearts don't beat inside human chests. But before I tell you how this story ends, I need to take you back to how it started, because this wasn't supposed to be a day anyone would remember. It was just supposed to be a quiet winter Saturday, the kind where nothing happens, and that's exactly the point, and that's what made everything that followed so terrifying. The Richardson family had lived in Pine Grove for almost a decade, and every winter they did the same thing, bundled up their kids, drove out to Miller Lake, let them run around in the snow while the adults drank coffee from thermoses and talked about nothing important, and this particular Saturday was no different, at least not at first. Their youngest, a 6-year-old boy named Ethan, had been excited about this trip all week, not because of the snow or the frozen water or the adventure, but because this time his best friend was coming with him, and his best friend happened to have 4 legs, golden fur, and a habit of never letting Ethan out of his sight. Max had been part of the family since before Ethan was born, and from the very first day they brought that baby home from the hospital, something clicked between them, like Max had decided right then and there that this tiny human was his responsibility, his purpose, his whole reason for existing. Everywhere Ethan went, Max followed, not in an annoying way, not barking or jumping or demanding attention, just quietly present, always watching, always close enough to reach him in seconds if something went wrong. And for 6 years nothing ever did, so everyone kind of stopped noticing how seriously Max took that job, everyone except Maximum. That morning, the drive out to Miller Lake took about 20 minutes, and Ethan spent the whole ride with his hand resting on Max's head, talking to him about the snowman they were going to build and the sticks they were going to find and all the places they were going to explore together, and Max just sat there listening like he understood every single word, his ears twitching slightly whenever Ethan's voice got excited, which was often. When they finally arrived, there were already a few other families scattered around the shoreline, kids throwing snowballs, parents setting up folding chairs, everyone dressed in layers and moving slowly the way people do when the air is cold enough to sting. The lake itself looked beautiful in a dangerous kind of way, a wide stretch of white and gray that seemed solid enough to walk on, and honestly most of it probably was, but the thing about frozen lakes is that they lie to you, they look safe everywhere even when they're not safe anywhere, and the spots that will hold your weight look exactly like the spots that won't, especially to a 6-year-old who doesn't know the difference. Ethan's parents had told him 100 times to stay away from the ice, to play in the snow near the trees, to never go past the big rocks that marked where the shoreline ended and the frozen water began, and Ethan always nodded and said okay because he was a good kid who listened, but he was also 6, and 6-year-olds forget things when they're having fun, and that's not a flaw, that's just what being a kid means. For the first hour or so, everything was fine. Ethan and Max ran through the snow together, Max bounding ahead and then circling back, Ethan laughing so hard his cheeks turned red, and the adults watched from a distance feeling relaxed because nothing seemed wrong, nothing felt urgent, the coffee was warm and the kids were happy and the cold wasn't unbearable yet. But then Ethan spotted something. On the ice, maybe it was a stick or a shadow or just a shape that caught his attention, and without thinking, without remembering any of the warnings, he started walking toward it, and Max noticed immediately, his whole body going still the way it did whenever something felt off, and he let out a low whine that nobody heard except Ethan, who ignored it because whatever was out there looked way more interesting than whatever Max was worried about. By the time the adults realized what was happening, Ethan was already 15 feet onto the ice, and his mom stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee, and his dad started yelling his name, not angry yelling, scared yelling, the kind of yelling that makes your voice crack because your body already knows something terrible is coming, and Ethan heard them and stopped, confused, looking back at the shoreline like he didn't understand what the big deal was, and then the ice beneath him made a sound that no one who's ever heard it can forget, a deep groaning crack that traveled outward like a warning that came too late, and before anyone could take a single step, the ice gave way and Ethan disappeared into the water. The scream that came out of his mother wasn't a scream you could describe, it was raw and primal and it tore through the cold air like something breaking, and his father started running toward the lake but stopped at the edge because he didn't know if the ice would hold him, he didn't know if going out there would save his son or just put 2 people in the water instead of 1, and that hesitation, that half-second of adult logic trying to calculate risk. That's the moment Max made his move. He didn't hesitate, he didn't calculate, he didn't look at the ice or test it with his paw or wait for permission. He just ran, full speed, straight toward the hole where Ethan had gone under, and someone yelled for the dog to stop, probably thinking Max was going to make things worse, probably thinking a dog on unstable ice was just another disaster waiting to happen. But Max wasn't listening to anyone. He wasn't thinking about himself at all, he was thinking about that little boy who talked to him in the car and laughed with him in the snow and rested a hand on his head like it was the most natural thing in the world. By the time Max reached the hole, Ethan had already come back up once, gasping, his small hand slapping at the edge of the ice trying to grab something solid, but the cold was already taking over, his fingers weren't working right, his arms were getting heavy, and the shock of the freezing water was doing what it always does, shutting the body down piece by piece, and he went under again, and this time he didn't come up as fast. Max didn't jump into the water, not at first, maybe because some deep animal instinct told him that wouldn't help, or maybe because the ice near the hole was still intact enough to hold him. But what he did was even harder to watch. He laid down on his belly, spreading his weight across the ice the way no one had taught him to do, and he stretched his whole body toward the hole, his front paws reaching into the water. And when Ethan's head finally broke the surface again, Max grabbed onto his jacket with his teeth and pulled, not yanking, not thrashing, just a steady, desperate pull that used every ounce of strength in his body. And here's where things got worse before they got better, because Ethan was too heavy and too limp and the angle was wrong, and even though Max wouldn't let go, he couldn't lift him out either, so they were stuck there, the dog on his belly gripping this child like his life depended on it, Ethan barely conscious with only his face above water, and the ice creaking under both of them like it was deciding whether to hold or collapse. Someone on the shore was calling 911, someone else was screaming for a rope. Ethan's father was still trying to figure out how to get out there without making everything worse, and the seconds stretched into something that felt nothing like time, something that felt more like being trapped in a moment that might never end. Max's legs started shaking, you could see it even from the shore, the cold was getting to him too, but he didn't let go, he didn't adjust his grip or try to save himself or do anything that would make this easier on him. He just held on and kept pulling, kept making these sounds in his throat that weren't barks or whines but something in between, something that sounded almost like he was talking to Ethan, telling him to hold on, telling him not to give up, telling him help was coming even though he had no way of knowing if that was true. And then, finally, someone found a rope, a long orange rope from someone's truck, and Ethan's father tied it around his waist and started crawling across the ice on his stomach while two other men held the other end ready to pull him back if he fell through too, and the whole time Max was still there, still holding, still shaking, still refusing to give up even though his body had to be screaming at him to stop. When Ethan's father finally reached them, he didn't waste time on words, he grabbed his son under the arms and pulled him up onto the ice. And the moment Ethan's weight was off of him, Max let go, his jaw opening slowly like it had been locked in place, and he just collapsed right there on the ice, his sides heaving, his golden fur soaked and already starting to freeze, and for one terrible second nobody knew if he was okay. Nobody knew if saving that little boy had cost this dog his life. They got Ethan back to shore and someone wrapped him in every coat and blanket they could find, and the paramedics arrived faster than anyone expected because when dispatch heard a child was in the water they sent everyone, and the whole time Ethan's mother was sobbing and saying his name over and over like it was the only word she remembered. But Ethan's father didn't follow right away because he couldn't leave Max out there, so he crawled back out onto the ice one more time, grabbed that dog by the collar, and pulled him toward solid ground inch by inch until they were both on the shore. And when he finally stood up with Max in his arms, the dog lifted his head and looked toward Ethan, like even half frozen and barely conscious he still needed to know if his boy was okay. At the hospital, the doctor said Ethan was lucky, incredibly lucky, the kind of lucky that doesn't usually happen, because a few more minutes in that water and his body temperature would have dropped past the point of recovery, a few more minutes and this story would have a very different ending. And when they asked his parents how he'd managed to keep his head above water long enough for help to arrive, nobody had to think about the answer. They all knew it was maximum. The dog had held on when everything was working against him, the cold, the weight, the ice that could have broken at any moment, and he'd done it without training, without commands, without anyone telling him what to do. He'd done it because somewhere deep in his instincts, deeper than logic or fear or self-preservation, he knew that Ethan needed him and nothing else mattered. The story got out the way stories do now. Someone posted about it online, a local news station picked it up, and within 48 hours it was everywhere. People sharing it on their feeds with comments like, "This is why dogs are better than people," and "I'm not crying, you're crying," and "We don't deserve dogs." And for a few days Max became a kind of symbol, proof that courage doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Proof that love can make you do things your body shouldn't be able to do. But here's what got to me most, and I think this is what got to everyone who really paid attention to this story. It wasn't the dramatic rescue or the viral posts or the headlines about a hero dog. It was what happened after, when Ethan came home from the hospital 2 days later and walked through his front door and Max was waiting there like he always was. But this time Ethan didn't just pet him on the head or talk to him about their next adventure. This time he sat down on the floor and wrapped both arms around that dog's neck and didn't let go for a long, long time. He didn't say anything. He was only 6 and probably didn't have words for what he was feeling, but Max seemed to understand anyway. He always did, and he just leaned into that hug and closed his eyes and rested his head on Ethan's shoulder like this was exactly where he was supposed to be. The family didn't do any interviews for the first week. They were too shaken, too grateful, too caught up in the terrifying realization of how close they came to losing everything. But eventually Ethan's mom posted a short video, just 15 seconds of Ethan and Max sleeping next to each other on the couch, and she captioned it with 3 words that said more than any news story ever could: "He never leaves." And that's the part that sticks with me, not the ice or the panic or the heroic rescue, but the simple truth that Max had been protecting Ethan for 6 years before that day and would keep protecting him for every year that came after. Not because he was trained to, not because he was a special rescue dog or a police K9 or anything other than a regular family pet, but because something inside him recognized that little boy as his person, his responsibility, his whole heart. And when the moment came that love became a matter of life and death, he didn't think about it, he didn't hesitate, he just acted. There's something humbling about that, something that makes you stop and wonder if you'd have the same courage in the same situation, or if you'd be one of the people on the shoreline calculating risks while the seconds slipped away. I'm not saying the adults did anything wrong that day. They were scared and they were being smart and they got Ethan out eventually. But there's a reason this story went viral, and it wasn't because of the rescue, it was because of the contrast, the way Max moved while everyone else froze, the way instinct and love and loyalty turned a dog into something that looked a lot like a miracle. So I guess what I want to leave you with is this: next time you look at your dog sleeping on the couch or following you to the kitchen or staring at you for no reason, remember that you might not know what they're capable of, you might not know what they'd do if everything went wrong. But stories like this one remind us that their love isn't casual, it isn't just about treats and belly rubs, it goes somewhere deeper than we usually think about, somewhere we might not even be able to reach ourselves. I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. If you were standing on that shoreline and saw your child go through the ice, what would you have done? Would you have hesitated like those other adults? Would you have run? Would you have frozen? And be honest, because there's no shame in not knowing. These situations never happen the way you imagine them. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, if it made you look at dogs a little differently or hug your own pet a little tighter, maybe share it with someone who needs to see it, a parent, a dog lover, anyone who might need a reminder that the world still has moments of pure, unselfish love in it, because stories like this one deserve to be told, and dogs like Max deserve to be remembered, and maybe, just maybe, we all need to believe that courage like that still exists somewhere, even if it has 4 legs and a tail.